somewhere, sometime during the whitetail rut of November, the traditional rut, it's going to be hot for some of you hunters. There's just no question about it.
It seems like we're all dealing with hunting in the heat. You're watching Deer and Deer Hunting TV.
This is where it all begins.
This is Deer and Deer Hunting TV.
We've seen a lot of unseasonably warm weather these past few Novembers. Call it global warming, call it what you will, but it's there and it's real. And it really changes the way you have to hunt.
So how do you go after a whitetail when the temperatures begin to spike? Well, the first thing is you have to hunt where whitetails want to be. Heavy timber still provides some shade. Cedars and junipers also cast a big shadow. So do steep hillsides, eroded creeks where they can get down there. Any of these things offer shade.
Basically, you have to resort back to that type of hunting you were doing early in the season, where you're focusing on those first couple of hours in the morning and those last couple of hours in the afternoon, because that's when you're going to see most of your deer activity.
Well, it's going to appear as if these whitetails have slowed down, that the rut's quit. Some people even say, oh, the rut never even started. Don't listen to those naysayers. The rut always is approximately the same time period year after year because of photo period. Their eyes, a whitetail's eyes, tell them exactly what time it is, and that dictates when estrus comes in and when the bucks begin to rut harder and harder and harder. So they're going to rut whether it's hot or not, but they may rut under the cover of darkness. So that means you may have to select dawn and dusk hunting periods instead of sitting out there all day long on stand.
You need to hunt when the hunting's good. You need to take a break when the hunting's poor. And you can get all the information you need by just analyzing the data from your scouting cameras.
Another place they'll go? To water. They're going to need more water. And as the rut ramps up, these athletes, they've got to hydrate just like any other athlete. And for whitetails, that game goes the entire month of November.
Deer and Deer Hunting is brought to you by Scent Killer Gold with Hunt Dry Technology Plus. Apply it, try it, and go hunt. Hornady, accurate, deadly, dependable. Get armed and deadly with Easton FMJ arrows, and by 10-Point Crossbow Technologies. There is no substitute. When we come back,
I put my binocular up on that buck, and he definitely had shooter qualities.
this is Deer and Deer Hunting. This segment of Deer and Deer Hunting is brought to you by Redneck Blinds.
Nebraska is one of those magical whitetail locations. Why? Well, it's in the Midwest, right in the middle of the heartland, where all the crops are. And there's good cover here too, good refuge. It has terrain that varies from the rolling sand hills, western sagebrush, all the way down to cornfields, soybean fields, and exactly what you would see anywhere else in the heartland.
So we've got a little slice of whitetail heaven here that's got a fair amount of woods, river bottom, also a big cornfield that's harvested before the season, and little CRP, tall grassland, so it's got a little bit of everything.
Another thing about Nebraska is the fact that it has big deer, big antlers, and big bodied. It has great genetics for big whitetails, the Dakota subspecies of whitetail, and those Kansas genetics. Yeah, there's some good genetics that come across the border. You mix that all up in Nebraska, in the Cornhusker state, and it results in some monster whitetails. Fortunately, Neil has been out scouting for us. So when I arrived here in Nebraska, I was fresh off another hunt. I hadn't had time to hit the ground here, spend an extra day or two looking for deer sign, looking for deer activity, but that didn't matter. Neil pointed me in the direction, a hot green field where a lot of deer were coming in and out of. An alfalfa hay field is what it was, and there was a soybean field across the fence. Now, I loved hunting near that field. In fact, we focused on a high stand in the timber right adjacent to it, hoping that the deer would funnel in and out of there. That's what you can expect in Nebraska. Steady deer action, whitetail action, all morning long. And the rut is going good. Are we gonna have a good hunt here in Nebraska? I think we are. When you see numbers of deer like that, it's mid-November. There is that lockdown thing going on. Some of the does are coming in heat. Those bigger bucks are holding them down into tight little pockets of cover. But we're seeing enough activity that one of those bigger bucks is going to slip up sooner or later. Deer, they love rubbing their antlers this time of the year. From September, when they strip the velvet off, all the way into December, they'll rub. But right now is the big rubbing period, October and November. And what they love to rub on? Well, it varies depending on what part of the country you're on. But you can always guarantee they're gonna rub on a cedar post. And this post right here shows it. They have been rubbing this big time. A cedar post like this, placed strategically near your stand like we have, can actually attract deer in and maybe make it a stopping point for where you can get a shot. So even though this is an old fence line right here and this post wasn't put here specifically for that purpose, you can put a cedar post in and maybe get a shot at a buck as he pauses in an opening that you choose and not him. I think I kind of like this spot, and I can see it from the stand I was in this morning. I began to realize that that field was the place to be. So Neil and I came up with an idea. Let's put a ground blind right next to some hay bales. The deer wouldn't even notice it was there. It looked just like another hay bale, and I would have a great shooting position. This morning, we were in the high rise. Today, we're down in the basement, ground blind. We're moving around just a little bit on this Nebraska property to see if we can find the deer. Now, what's changed since this morning is the temperature. I'm sweating a little bit. Yeah, it's mid-November here in southwest Nebraska, but it can be hot, just like it can be in many parts of the country during the rut. So we've set up where they're going to feed, and where they feed is where the bucks come to check and find a new girlfriend during the rut. So we're gonna have does coming out here, we're gonna have bucks following the does, we're gonna have bucks just coming out to check out on the does, and hopefully one of those bucks is gonna be a keeper. A food source, even when it's hot, is still a hot place to be. That evening, I was excited after getting the ground blind set up. I was right there where the action would hopefully play out. And play out it did. Hordes of does and fawns and yearlings showed up on that field. In fact, at one time, there were more than 25 deer on the field, and they were not even aware I was sitting up by the hay bales. They went about their business, feeding, browsing, carrying on. Little bucks would come in and out, and then I spied antlers in the background. There was some thick brush that bordered this field. You could barely see into it. In fact, it was on a neighboring property, but it always held bucks cruising. I put my binocular up on that buck, and he definitely had shooter qualities. Nice 4x5 frame, fairly wide, fairly tall. What did I observe after scanning him? He was a younger buck, probably a 3.5-year-old at most, and a buck you'd want to see get another year or two under him because he had lots of potential. So instead of ending my hunt right then and there on that first day, I let the buck go. I wanted to see what else was there, and I wanted to watch the show play out.
When we come back,
Sure enough, a buck cruised right out into it. I leveled my gun, got ready to shoot.
when Deer and Deer Hunting returns. This segment of Deer and Deer Hunting is brought to you by Matthews.
The forecast did not look good. Well, for Nebraska, it was just an average forecast, but the winds were going to come up, and that meant the deer would likely go into thicker cover. Now, Nebraska deer, they're used to wind. It's not a big issue for them. They grew up here, but they still like to be comfortable just like you and I. And those deer did just about the same thing. They anticipated that wind, so I felt like they had fed heavily that evening. The morning feed was a little slower, not as many deer, and the buck sightings, again, were off. Yesterday morning, there were deer, bucks cruising in and out of here all the time. From sunrise, from shooting light, all the way till mid to late morning. Not sure about our gamble this morning. Those whitetails that were on here feeding right at dawn have moved off, and we haven't seen a buck yet. But this ground blind where it's situated, we should be in the travel flow. If any bucks decide to cruise this like they did yesterday morning, they'll fall right into our trap. But none of the mature deer were out and about. Was the afternoon going to be the same? A blowout with that wind coming in? Well, I had my hopes set, and it was time to see if a big buck would show up. As the light started to fade, I was beginning to think, well, it's a wrap. And then a buck showed up. I could see him in the backdrop, and I got my binocular up, checked him out. Heavy, fairly tall, narrow, but a long main beam, and he cruised right out onto the field. Oh, did I have a tough time. Minutes of shooting light left, a good buck, but not a giant buck, a mature buck. And guess what I did? Yep, I passed him right then and there. Well, it was only the very beginning of the hunt. I didn't want to fill my tag out without getting an idea of how many other mature bucks were here. Well, the forecast, the wind was supposed to lay down, and that was even a better forecast. But one other little factor was going to influence my morning hunt: fog. Now, fog gives you a little bit of ambiance, right? A lot of people, they're like, I don't really like fog, I can't see. I tend to love fog. When the fog is rolling through the woods, deer feel like they can get away with a little more movement. But deer were ghosting out in front of me, and sure enough, a buck cruised right out into it. I leveled my gun, got ready to shoot, and he took off and ran back into the timber following does. Not wasting any time, I got my rattling antlers out, rattled several times, hoping to draw him back out onto the field before the fog disappeared. And no luck in that department. As the cold front approached, it began to cool down, and the deer activity started to pick up. I saw a doe come out in the field, and then looking back into the corner of the brush, I spied a buck, a good buck. In fact, it looked like the buck I had actually passed earlier in the hunt, and here he came. I made up my mind right then and there. You know what? He's a good buck. I was gonna put the focus on him. No, I missed! I haven't missed a buck in a long time. That buck just wouldn't stop. I was coyote howling at him, barking. And he was so wound up on that doe, he wouldn't stop. So I thought he slowed down enough. I tried to lead him, took the shot. I missed. Was Nebraska gonna be a doomsday hunt for me? It's the rut. Things can happen at any time. Before you know it, there are a half dozen does on the field and a young buck chasing them around. Sure enough, I saw antlers. Quick scan, not a shooter. It's a nice 4x4, young buck. The minute's shooting light was disappearing, and I spied another buck. This one had all the makings, the markings, the look of a mature deer. And when he stepped out to rub a fence post, he had that huge, roly-poly, horse-like body. What was I gonna do? I only had minutes to get this shot off. There was no way to unzip the blind. I had thought earlier of a plan, a backup plan. I wanted to be prone. I wanted to be rock solid. Set up my bipods. I was only halfway out. That's all I needed to be to get solid. He's down. I came under the blind. That's kind of a Kaiser crawl move. Set up rock solid on the bipods. There was no way that deer was getting off this field tonight. Holy, oh! This is a Christmas surprise. And it's not even Thanksgiving! This buck come out on this edge. He was following a smaller buck, and I could see him coming through there. Dark head, look at this! Holy buckets. This is what I saw, and I knew it was a mature buck. Those older bucks have that darker skull cap. This here is a true Cornhusker special. Came straight at me, quartered just slightly, and we sent a Hornady 200 grain ELDX bullet downrange. And I think you saw what that bullet will do. Done in Nebraska, Hornady style.
Deer and Deer Hunting is brought to you by Analogics. Protect your herd with the power of science. Thompson Center, America's master gunmakers. Sever broadheads straight through. Hunter Safety System. Stay connected. And by Cuddyback. More deer, fewer blanks.
I think there are a couple real good reasons why people hunt with muzzleloading rifles. The first one is people like the tradition of it and they like the challenge of it. I think the other reason that people use muzzleloaders is that it provides additional hunting opportunities. There are seasons that extend beyond the normal seasons, and there are also some extra tags that you can take advantage of. I think people kind of overestimate what a muzzleloader is really all about. I know guys think that modern muzzleloaders, it's just like shooting a center fire rifle, but it really isn't. You've got one shot. You know, at best, I can reload this gun in maybe 15 seconds. So just do the math on that. You've got one shot. I'm just going to go through a few things that I do with the muzzleloader to assure that I'm going to have the best accuracy I can get. So the first thing I'm going to do when I'm at the range is I'm going to clean the bore. This gun's been sitting with oil in the bore. I want to get that oil out, and I want to have a nice clean bore. Just run that down there. And that'll get rid of all that residue, and then I just run a nice dry patch down there just to get rid of that moisture, because black powder and moisture do not go well together. Okay, now this is one thing that is a must, because whenever you're pushing that rod down the barrel, and there's always a chance that you're going to push a little piece of debris up into the nipple. So you always want to fire, before you make your load, you always want to fire a cap through the ignition system, through the nipple, to clear that hole out. Okay, now it's time to load again. And for that, you use this nifty little thing so you don't get your finger moisture on there. And I'm loading 2 pellets. Just let those drop down the barrel. And you just take your bullet and your sabo, get it started in there, and then just push it on down the barrel. Easy peasy until you feel it sit on the charge. And now you've probably all seen these guys that pound on the handle and that. Never ever do that. Just push it until you feel it hit the pellets, and then just kind of snug it up a little bit and you're good to go. So what I'll do next is I'll put a primer on there and I'll take the shot. And then I always want to repeat that cleaning process because I want my barrel to be the same shot after shot after shot. So what I'll do is run a clean patch down there, run a dry patch down there, reload the gun, reprime the gun, and shoot it again. And I'll keep that process up through all of my sighting in period. And then I'll know that when I go to the range or I go hunting with this same load, I will do the same thing. I'll probably shoot a charge through there. I will run the wet patch through, the dry patch through, put my load in, and I'm ready to go hunting. So it's really that easy, but the key is to be really consistent. You want to be consistent in your loading every time to get the best accuracy that you can. For tradition, for the challenge, or because you can get another tag, muzzleloader hunting is fun. So just get out there and do it. You'll really enjoy it, I guarantee it.